Okay, you're on.
My name is Beverly Sanders, and today is August 12th, 2013. I'm visiting today with Buddy Pendarvis and Phil Finn in McFarland Memorial United Methodist Church in Norman, Oklahoma. Phil Finn will be conducting the interview today with Buddy Pendarvis. Phil, it's yours.
Thank you. It was my pleasure to serve as a senior minister of this church for a good number of years. And during that time, I had association with Buddy or Robert Pendarvis, and I came into a great appreciation for so many things that he represented and that he did and that he accomplished for McFarland. Buddy, you've been a long-standing member here, if I remember correctly, since 1947.
That is correct.
And though you weren't raised here, you came to school here, and that's how you became involved in and affiliated with McFarland.
Yes, I was born and raised in Barnsdall, Oklahoma, where I was a member of the First Methodist Church. When I came to the University of Oklahoma in September of 1947, I joined or transferred my membership to McFarland. And
You've been a member ever since then, although
Right.
your membership was, or your tenure here, residency here, was interrupted by your service in the Korean War.
yes, I was in the Korean War.
Yeah.
I was in the service from 51 through 54.
Okay.
But I returned in 54 to McFarland.
Buddy is a very distinguished lawyer, and he's participated in practically everything there is to participate in the community and in the church. And his participation has been very influential, particularly in the church, not to slight what you've done in the community as well. You've been legal counsel for the school board for years and years and years, plus either county attorney, district attorney?
Yes, when I graduated from law school in 1957, I went directly to the county attorney's office in Cleveland County, served as assistant, then became the county attorney in 1960.
I see, okay. Well, Buddy, you've done so many things in this church, but what I'm particularly interested in, for the sake of getting it on the record, is at one time you held the title the Chancellor of McFarland. Now, whether you ever had that title or not, that's what you were all these years, because you gave legal service and legal advice both to the ministers and the staff and also to the various committees and the functions of the church. And that was just indispensable in many respects. And I want to rehearse a little bit what you did in that area. I have 8 things of significance listed that partly come from my memory that you accomplished as a lawyer for us. I'll just read them off, and then I want you to pick them up one by one
I'll be
and talk
happy to.
about,
Right.
because there are significant pieces of McFarland history associated with this. You handled a lawsuit that was serious against McFarland. You did legal work for a couple of bond campaigns, maybe more than 2, I don't remember. You assisted with the acquisition of the property surrounding the church, which was very significant in our history. You assisted with the legal documents for the installation of the organ. You were part of the zoning battles that we went through, which I remember. The establishment of the McFarland Foundation, the acquisition of some very significant property which was sold, the Ornbaum property, and put into the foundation. And then you advised us on a variety of personnel issues and employment issues. But let's go back to the first one that I was really aware of, because I was a new minister here, and it was the lawsuit.
Yes, that was a very unfortunate incident that occurred that involved in our child care daycare program. And what happened was very unusual in that there was a piano, upright piano, there in the fellowship hall, and it was such a freak accident. A young person was up on the back of the piano, and another one got up, and all of a sudden the piano was swaying, and unfortunately the piano tipped over onto a child, and that the child was injured, and we had a very serious issue to deal with. One was the issue of liability, because we were operating that daycare center at that time. It was under our supervision, and the facts were that we had to accept some liability. Then we had to deal with the issue of the damage or the injury to the young person. And you and I spent many conferences. We met with the Board of Trustees, and we were able to, after a period of time, resolve it in a manner that was agreeable to both sides. And it was very unfortunate, but in fact, over all the years, I don't think we've had anything like that.
I don't think so either. Yeah.
That's the only one that I have been aware of, and that was just a total accident that we had to address.
I think that accident happened in 1978. I came here in 79, and that's when I was made aware of it. There are 2-3 things that I remember very much about that I'd like for you to comment on. One was we didn't have enough cash money to pay off the liability because our insurance was not for the significant amount that we needed. And so we had to get busy and raise the additional money. And I remember also you gave me an education in law about that, and a lot of this depends upon what court you get into, where it's tried, who's on the jury. I guess it would be a jury trial, but I always remember you said, we're ready to go to trial. I'm ready to go to trial. I'm a trial lawyer. And apparently we came right up to the margin on that.
Right.
Yeah. But you negotiated it out. Do you have a recollection of what that amount was for that original lawsuit?
No, I really don't, but I knew the attorney that was representing the young boy and his parents.
Yeah.
I knew him personally, and I dealt with him extensively, and we continued to evaluate the case, and we also continued to ascertain how much we felt that we could, as a church, really raise money and satisfy the judgment. Yeah. And you're correct. After we did our discovery, we could have gone to jury trial, but it appeared to be in the best interest of both parties that we go ahead and resolve it. Now, I think it was less than $100,000. It was probably, I think, in the neighborhood of $50,000.
Buddy, I think it was over $1 million. It was 2 or 3 million, the original.
Oh, yeah, but I'm talking about the amount we settled.
I think the settlement was $250,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, but anyway, you carried the ball on that.
Yeah.
And if there was anything good to come out of it, it was that it opened our eyes to the need of sufficient liability insurance, which right after that, we made sure that we had.
Right.
And you did legal work also concerning at least 2 bond campaigns.
Yes. The first one was dealing primarily, well, that's interesting, because this goes back a great number of years, and I think there were only 2 bond issues. When we say bond issues, we had to be, the first one I think was for air conditioning.
I think that's right.
Air conditioning in the sanctuary. And we put in new ducts and everything. And the finance committee, I think I was on the finance committee, and Harold Unicke and others that I remember I worked with. And we came up with a plan for a bond issue. However, and we were going to sell them to members of the church. However, I had to, make application and get exemption from the Securities, State of Oklahoma Securities Commission. And we went through that process, and we actually issued those bonds and paid a reasonable rate of interest and satisfied them. And most of the bonds were sold to members of the church.
That's, yeah. Well, now do you have a recollection of the second bond issue? Did you?
No, it was another improvement, but
Well, actually, you did the air conditioning, then you handled the legal work on the bond issue, which is $500,000 to renovate or restore the sanctuary. And
okay,
and you went through the same procedure. You had to go to the security committee.
Now you refresh my memory, because that was quite a task of
Yes, it was.
refurbishing, because we took all the pews out and took them down to Baylor, down to Waco,
Yeah.
to have them refinished and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
So I remember that distinctly.
Actually, when you said it was quite a task, I was saying yes, because I remember you ran into a little bit of opposition to the Securities Commission or whatever you call it. I never knew what that
Right.
was, but you had to stand up and fight for us.
That's, yes, but we were able to do it because we had the one bond issue and
Yeah.
it went very smoothly, and we had approval, and therefore
Yeah.
we were able to do that.
I wasn't a part of that first bond issue, or the second bond issue. I remember that we were on 15-year bonds. I think we were giving 9%.
I think so.
People would be glad to have 9%.
That's right.
on
That's
that.
right.
Okay. What about the acquisition of the property east of the church where this new building sits on?
Well, that's one of the most interesting facets of my experience because for many years prior to your becoming the senior minister, Wayne Coffin, and I think all senior ministers were interested in the property that was due east of the McFarland that we are now on. And it was owned by a family named Barber, and a long time Norman. There was two sisters. There was two frame houses there, and they had a couple of dogs. Now we had 2 lots, but they had the 2 lots on the east end. Therefore, we weren't going to be able to do anything. And they had a brother who worked for Montgomery Ward in Oklahoma City, and I know that Wayne would go up and visit with him, trying to negotiate something. And finally, at a particular time, we were able to acquire one through negotiation. And then the other, it was unfortunate, but the other one, sister, became ill and had a guardianship, and it got to the point that they needed the money, and we were able to acquire it through the guardianship court. So once we had those 2 pieces of property, we could really start thinking of some expansion
You bet.
for McFarland. But we had to get those 2 first.
Yeah. We wouldn't be where we're
Right.
sitting right now if
That's
we
right.
weren't, and if you didn't have a
Right.
hand in that. You have an interesting story to tell about the organ, the Nowak organ.
Nowak, Oregon.
Yeah.
Yes, that was interesting. We had a committee, a very fine committee that actually traveled throughout the United States to make a selection of recommendation for a new organ, because the old organ we had had for many years. The church was built in 1924. It had been renovated and work had been done, but there was a time for a new organ. And so the committee recommended a person by the name of Nowak, Fritz Nowak. And so when they had done their work, made the recommendation, I had the pleasure of actually meeting with him. He was from the Boston, Massachusetts area. And as we progressed on it, if I remember correctly, it was going to be in excess of $500,000.
That's right.
And so as I progressed on it and determined that it was going to take a period of time, and part of it would be coming from Europe, part of it from England, and then he would put it together in Boston and then bring it down here in a truck and reassemble it in our sanctuary. And I thought, well, wait a minute, this is one individual. His name was Fritz Nowak. And I became concerned about the period of time that it would take. Now, I was impressed with him, and I knew his credentials, but I was concerned about what if something happened to him, because it was strictly on his reputation. And he agreed, and he was able to secure a guarantee that satisfied the church by another company in Boston, Massachusetts, that if anything happened to him in the way of a disability or death, that they would assume the responsibility, and they were familiar with his work and how he, his design. And so we actually prepared and drafted a contract and all the parties signed, because this was going to be a significant, in my recollection, I think it took about 2 years
That's correct.
to build the organ.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, there's another story about that organ. We had some seed money for that organ.
Yes.
That also was seed money, part of it for the McFarland Foundation. And it was because of your contacts and your work that we were able to secure that. I'd like for you to comment about that, because it's made a big difference and it continues to make a big difference to the church today.
Well, I had the pleasure of knowing 3 sisters, Louise Perkinson,
Yeah.
Mary Perkinson, and Nell Perkinson. I had worked with Louise at the courthouse when I was the county attorney. She was the, quote, home demonstration lady in those days, referred to as Perky. And the other sister, one was a school teacher and other worked for the government. But when they retired, they on the family farm near Purcell. But I had a long time relationship with them, and they inherited a substantial amount of money from a brother named Benjamin, who was a petroleum engineer and had worked in the oil industry in South America. And so when they inherited this substantial money, we created the trust for them right off. And but as I worked with them, their heart was with McFarland. And with regard to the organ, I think Louise contributed about $450,000 for the organ. And the Board of Trustees actually recognized that and named it the Louise Perkinson organ. And likewise, Mary and Nell, when they passed on, part of their estate went to McFarland. And they were the seed money, and I remember distinctly drafting their documents. They wanted to make sure that a total sum of $1 million was vested in the McFarland Foundation. And the last one to die, whatever had been contributed, we wanted to make sure that there was at least $1 million that would be from the 3 sisters.
It seems to me that originally they gave $500,000 to the McFarland Foundation, which
was Louise.
Which was the catalyst for establishing that foundation. And then Louise and her sisters promised that in time they would make that $1 million.
Right.
And the balance of that came later, I think.
But also, we have the organ, then we have the foundation. But she also contributed to the campaign that we had to have this extension of the McFarland Church as we know it today.
Yes.
To the east.
Yeah.
And I think that was in the neighborhood of $500,000.
It was $700,000.
$700,000, okay.
I distinctly remember that and remember my visit with Louise about that,
I think outside of the McFarland family, those 3 sisters probably have given as much to
I think that's correct. And it's interesting, they led very modest lives.
Oh, yes.
Very modest homes.
Right,
You couldn't
right.
convince them to spend any money on themselves.
No. And she ended up, she lived on Camden Way for many years.
Yeah.
They had the farm, the family farm, which was in McLean County. They conveyed it to the Oklahoma Conference. And then her home on Camden Way, she conveyed to the church.
That's correct, and we sold that.
Right.
Originally, the idea was to use that as a second parsonage for an associate. And I suspect Louise would have been a little bit disappointed that we sold it rather than use it for parsonage. You were part of the original foundation trustees board when we established that. And I think I mentioned in a previous interview that that foundation now is worth about $4 million. In comparison to some, maybe that's not a lot, but that makes a gigantic difference what they're
Right.
able to plow into the church now. So say a little bit about the Orenbaum property, which you've also handled.
So that's quite interesting. That happened just a few years ago. But a lot of it has to be attributed to you because the Orenbaum, his mother, James Orenbaum's mother, had been a longtime member of McFarland and a Norman public school teacher. So when he drafted his estate planning documents, he provided that the home in which he resided in Burbank, California, would be sold and the proceeds to the foundation. Now, I think they had a visit with you at a particular point and learned of the foundation. And then it was written into his trust. And so we had this home in Burbank, California, and we went to work on it and had it appraised, and we were able to sell it and received almost $500,000 from the sale of that particular. And also, in connection with that, I would say that since the mother was a school teacher, he gave substantial to the Norman Public Schools and the foundation of the Norman Public Schools.
You know, now that you mentioned that, I remember that. And back to the Perkinsons. The Perkinsons also endowed a chair at OU.
That's
with that
correct,
money.
in the library.
And I think that endowment was $1 million, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was for their sister, in honor of her sister, and it was the library.
I see, okay.
But they also donated to Dean McGee Eye Institute because they were, some of them, they had been treated at Dean McGee.
Do you have any particular recollections or comments about the employment issues that you help with? I beat a path to your door because when I first came here in '79, basically it was hire and fire at will.
Right.
Then laws changed and you had to dot all the i's and cross all the t's, and it had us all scared to death.
Well, it not only applies to the church, but as you indicated, I do represent the Norman Public Schools, and therefore I deal a lot with employment issues, which include the discrimination issues, the disability issues, ADA, we call it American Disability Act. And so a lot of those things, all entities had to address those. American Disability Act, we had to have an elevator, a lot of things. Employment, we had to deal with the issue of discrimination and how we employ and how we treat people. And there are just so many issues that within the last 15 or 20 years have been very critical to the operation not only of the church, but I also worked with the school district.
Well, I can testify personally that you kept us out of some hot water. So. You know, you mentioned the disability thing. That's something that hasn't been brought up in the interviews that I know of. But I well remember when this church was either forced or made up its mind, I don't remember, to put in the access to everything to accommodate people with disabilities.
Right.
And you know, I think that was about a $200,000 project, if I remember correctly. That's where we got a ramp that goes down to the sanctuary. We extended the elevator. We expanded the restrooms to accommodate wheelchairs. And I think, in essence, we made every portion of the old building accessible, with the exception of the balcony, and there was just no way to do that. So,
Right. That was, another issue that, we had to discuss, and I had to explain to you that that was a requirement, and we weren't exempt from it, and therefore we had to address it. And it not only did the churches have to comply, but public buildings had to comply.
you know, all those issues are interesting because it indicates how important the various talents are in people in a church. I remember we were stymied about how to make the sanctuary accessible from this east side of the building because we had stairs going down. And it was Leo Yonda, who used to be a member here, who was an engineer, and he came up with the solution to make that ramp go down into the sanctuary. So I was always grateful for that. You've not only been a leader and a help in these legal and financial matters, but also in spiritual matters. You've been a Sunday school teacher for the fellowship class for umpteen years, and I want you to comment about that in just a minute. And then we're going to switch over to, you were also designated the leader of a couple of lay witness missions that we had. But tell us about the fellowship class. I think the class that you teach today, and I have been teaching for a good number of years, is the oldest surviving class that we have in the church. I'm not sure. So.
To my knowledge, it is, because I started teaching the fellowship class with Raymond Cruz, because we were sort of team teaching. In 1970, so that would be, I guess this is my 43rd year. But I think that the class actually had its foundation after the war, World War II, and being the 50s, that Stuart Harrell, who was a professor at the University of Oklahoma and had an eloquent public speaker, he was the teacher for many years, and unfortunately had a sudden death. And for a period of years, there were various people that was teaching. But insofar as the age of it, yes, if you look at the roster, we've got some old members that.
No, by old, I didn't mean that. I
Well,
mean,
but no,
yeah.
I know, but
Yeah.
I think it was started probably in the 50s, and it was a couples class at that time, and during the time that I have had the privilege of teaching, we did have 60 or 70 attending regularly. At this time, it's dropped off due to the age. We still have people that moved to Norman that come, and we're down to 35 or 40 at this time. But there's a few, but boy, I can remember so well so many faithful members of that class.
Yes.
Doris Bratton was there.
Yeah.
Oh, Helen Cole,
Yes.
and so many, and Vera Strickland. I could go on and on, because I think of them very frequently, those dedicated people.
Well, I think of them too, plus those outside that class. When I come to church as a retiree now and sit there, I'm sometimes just overwhelmed about the faithfulness of people who've been out there for years and years and years.
Right.
And I think back on all these names. I didn't know Stuart Harrell, but of course Harold Hunicky and Raymond Cruz and some of the names you mentioned. My goodness, what they did for the church. Across the years, would you have any observations to make about how things have changed, either the spiritual climate of the church, of the Sunday school class? I think you've used in your Sunday school class all these years, what do they call it, the International Lesson Series?
Yes, International Bible Series.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting. That's been a real stable issue, because each member of the class gets a quarterly, and then they have a teacher's book that goes along with it. But I've had classes in the church come down and visit our class just to see how you do it. And normally they will say, "You mean you have a book and these people read it?"
Yeah.
And I say, "Yes." I said, I couldn't teach this class unless the members of the class prepared and knew the lesson, because that's the heart of the class, is for, because I do call on different members from time to time, and they're very responsive. And that's been the foundation of the class, is to study your lesson and be prepared to discuss it. And I look back, I just loved Helen Cole, because she could always just come up, and she was so eloquent, and many others, though, that really would speak up. And I have so many now that come up after class and will mention to me something that they were thinking of during class.
Yeah.
And I'll say, "Well, why didn't you say that? Why didn't you share that with the class?" And I try to encourage people to share.
Well, they were not all Helen Cole. She
No.
she wasn't shy.
No, she was up. No, she
As
was
well
not
as
shy.
some other-
Right.
But you mentioned that the other classes visiting you to see how you did it and so forth would comment. You mean they actually read that book? That was one of the things that always buffaloed me when I was a minister. You just couldn't get classes to take seriously reading something in preparation for Sunday school, with the exception, and it's been my experience in nearly all the churches I've been in, those who cling to the International Lesson Series. Among other things, it's very easy to read.
Right.
And people would read that and so forth. I used to go to Sunday school with my father-in-law. When we would visit him, they used the International Lesson Series.
Right.
I enjoyed that because I could sit there and read the lesson in 10 minutes.
Right.
And be a part of the class. So, you also were leader of the lay witness movement, one or two, I don't remember, but I know you were leader of one. And Dorella Logan, another one of the saints in this church.
Right.
I don't know if she conned you into being the leader or pressured you, but could you make a comment about that? I had asked you one time what your evaluation was, what difference it made.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I was very pleased to have the privilege of working on that. I had heard about lay witness mission at other churches, and when it was presented, I agreed to participate in it, and it really, I felt, created a great foundation within our church, and we had, the key to it was there was preparation in small groups, and we would meet on a weekly basis, almost like the Billy Graham Crusade.
Yep.
That we would meet in homes and somebody would host. And I went to the one, I think, where Nancy and Don Burgess were the hosts.
My goodness.
And I never will forget this, one lady who, we'd attend church together and everything. And I never will forget. She said, "Oh boy, I'll tell you what, I really feel like I know you now, buddy," because
Sure.
she had a different impression of me than after our session of preparation, because it was a group of 10 to 15 where you really shared belief and what is about McFarland, and you got acquainted.
Yes.
You can go to church every Sunday with somebody and sit by them and speak to them, and hey, they're a member of McFarland, but how well do you know them spiritually?
I think that's exactly right. I remember the group we were in. Same thing happened there, at least from my perspective. I just got to know some people. One of them I got to know was Philip Nolan. I don't know if you remember him or not, but he was classics professor.
Right.
And he had a voice like George Martin. George Martin was an associate minister
Right.
for a number of years, and everybody said he had the voice of God. Well, Philip Nolan was about half the size of George Martin, but he had the same kind of voice. And whenever I needed some help with Greek, Latin, or Hebrew, I'd call him up.
Right.
Help me out with this. So I want to switch just a little bit to something that in personal conversation we've talked about, and it intrigues and impresses me, and that's about the integration of the McFarland Church. In 1948, Ada Lois Scipio, who was, I think, actually recruited by the NAACP, sued the OU Regents for admission into OU, and she ultimately became an OU law student.
Right.
And I think the decision was handed down either 48 or 49, and I've read that it's a precursor to the Brown versus
Board of Education.
Thank you. And that impacted everybody in the state of Oklahoma, and McFarland had to be impacted by that and so forth. But thanks to Joe and Beverly Sanders, who are doing this taping, got me a copy of an Oklahoma City Times that has an article in it about racial barriers missing at Norman Church. And it's a discussion of McFarland, and it's particularly quotes Finus Crutchfield, who was the minister here, indicating that Finus publicly declared that we are an integrated church, everybody's welcome. The article also interestingly enough points out that McFarland was perhaps in a unique situation. We were in an academic situation. The 1948 ruling had already been there. We had people of different cultures and colors at OU. And being a campus church, many of those people were showing up here. So there was just kind of a silent integration. But what really impressed me was I lived through that era as a teen or a sub-teen. And I even remember in 1954, that is when all this came about. In my church, which was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was a great resistance to this, and I was even just aware of it as a teen. But you had some first-hand experience with that, and maybe had some observations to make, Sam.
Yes, as I indicated, I was raised in a small town of Barnsdall, Oklahoma, and we did not have any black in the community. It's like some other cities in the state of Oklahoma. They were not allowed to be there overnight. However, I did have cousins in Tulsa, and I would go to Tulsa and growing up and take the bus down, get on the bus and notice that the blacks were in the back of the bus and things of that nature. And then when I came to OU, I was there during this period of time you referred to, and I was in class where a black student was roped off in the classroom. And that would be in either 48 or 49, that the black student was roped off in our class. And then there wasn't, and moved on, it was quite a period of time before we had, of course we know that we had the Hendersons moved to Norman, and they, George and Barbara Henderson, when they moved, that was very significant in Norman, because Norman the same way. We didn't have black people in Norman. And so this community was like others, and we, of course, the big change, Prentice Scott was the first black player in 1957 to play at the University of Oklahoma. And Bud Wilkinson brought him in, and he was an outstanding player and an outstanding person. And so this was a real adjustment for McFarland too, because we had people in our church, you know, that had some resistance. But we have to understand that the whole nation
Oh, yes.
was concerned, and I think I've shared with you that I was in the service, and when I was in the service, I had blacks in my unit. I was started out as a forward observer, then a battery commander, and my first sergeant was a black Sergeant Bell. And so I got, I didn't tell any difference, and he thought the world of me, and I thought the world of him. And so that was in the early 50s. I go back to Fort Lee, Virginia, my last year in the service, and I was there when the Brown versus Board of Education came down. Now, I attended the First Methodist Church in Petersburg, Virginia, and I never will forget when that decision came down. And when I was discussing it, I would always say, well, that was a unanimous decision, and that's the law of the land. And they really got, many people got very mad at me.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll never forget, we were bowling over at the officers club, and it was full one night, and we went to the nearby town of Hopewell, and I didn't think anything of it. One of the black lieutenants that I had served in Korea with was on my team. We went to the bowling alley in Hopewell, and the guy came up and said, he can't come in here.
Yeah.
And we all turned around and
Walked out. Good for you.
Walked out.
Yeah.
But insofar as McFarland is concerned, gosh, we've been fortunate, Dewey and Selman and his
That's right.
wife, they were active in it. And there's a dear lady named Demas that still attends, and her daughter is now, I remember when she played basketball at Norman High, and she's now a dermatologist at the University Health Science Center. And so we've accepted the blacks, and we, unfortunately, it's hard to attract them, but I think that we've gone through, the whole country has, and the community has.
That's right.
But I think that they're welcome here at McFarland.
Oh, no question about it. But I was just impressed that as early as 1954, a senior minister, when other churches were really having to struggle with this, and declared, it was quoted in the newspaper, we're fully integrated.
Right.
He did give an awful lot of credit to being an academic community and just naturally acquiring some students that were foreign students and colored students by affiliate membership.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I think this article indicates that during that time, there were maybe more than a dozen regular attenders who were blacks
Right.
at this church. That's very impressive to me.
Yeah, Finus really, and of course, as we well know, he was also very instrumental in the creation and building of the Wesley Foundation
Yes.
on the campus.
Mhm.
Because when I was in school, Wesley Foundation met here at McFarland.
Yeah.
But he was.
Yeah, you're the ones that tore it up. We had to.
Well, we did enjoy being here, yes.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, the gentleman who's doing the taping, Joe Sanders, was part of the Wesley Foundation, and he told me that when the service club, the Methodist Service Club, provided some ushers in the balcony, and they had blacks ushering at that time, and made a point
Right.
to happen. So I just think it's great that this church was able to do that.
Oh, yeah.
With the attitude of the people and the commitment of the people, the way it did, when every place else I was acquainted with at that particular time, and even later when I tried to integrate my church in Oklahoma City, just had an uphill battle, you know.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And we know, you know, it still goes on at this time, the issue of whether there's racism or not. But
Well, Buddy, I'll make a concluding comment that if you want to add anything at all, I wish you would, and that is, I've had this fantasy that you add up all the hours that you have given to the church as a legal advisor and put a price tag to that, whatever the going rate it is, and give our present minister the bill and watch her faint. We might have to come up with borrowing another $1 million to pay you.
But one thing that you didn't touch on, and I want to share with Sarah, because you mentioned the fact that as we were doing this acquisition of all the property in this block for the expansion to the east, we had to go through the zoning process. And this is when you and I went before the city council, and you.
Oh, that's right, we forgot about that.
Yes. We, at that particular time, we were acquiring the property, and it took us a number of years to acquire the property, because we obviously didn't have a right of condemnation. But James McCall and Nancy worked very diligently in dealing with each homeowner on this property, because we would buy them another place, or we would arrange to buy it in the event of their death or disability. And once we did that, then we had to have a master plan for the development, not only of the parking lot to the south, and to the west, our whole area. It had to be approved by the city. And we moved, and we had to close the alley over there for the parking lot, and there were a lot of things that we had to work through the city. And we reached a point where we had to appear before the city council and get our parking plan approved. And you and I and Marion Bauman went to the city council, and it was public hearing, and we had some opposition, because the First Baptist Church had, within a few years prior to our expansion, also acquired homes, so for parking, and First Christian Church. So there was some sentiment in the community about churches having these parking lots. And we were there, and we had a very vocal person that spoke and indicated that we ought to be spending our money in different ways, and we shouldn't be building parking lots. And you were having a hard time, because he was saying nasty things about how we were spending our money. And but we were able to show what the plan was and the need for it, and it was approved, and we were able to do it. But it did take, it wasn't easy. I mean, the acquisition of the property wasn't easy.
No.
All the planning and zoning was not easy,
No.
but it took time and we did it.
You know, I became a convert to zoning matters after that first experience. They turned us down on the first application for parking, which was wall-to-wall asphalt on the site that this new
Right.
building would rest. And I was a little miffed about that when they turned that down. We had the designs, we're ready to go and so forth. But a city employee who was actually on the city's planning staff came to talk to me, and he said, you know, if you would build parking to the north, there's not going to be any problem, but would you build parking to the west and make it wall-to-wall asphalt without any landscaping and so forth, you're encroaching on other people's property and so forth. And it just made a lot of sense to me. And although I was miffed when we were turned down, in time, I began to appreciate the zoning regulations in this city.
Right.
I've gone back to some of my former churches. I'll tell you, one of my first churches was in Belen, New Mexico. And every time I go back there, I look around and I say, where are the zoning laws? There are none, you know.
Right.
They just build up next to the street and no landscape and so forth, so. Buddy, do you have anything else that you want to
No,
add?
it's just been a real privilege and honor to work with so many fine ministers that we've had at McFarland, including the distinguished service that you provided to McFarland. I had the pleasure of working with, as I indicated, your predecessor, Wayne, for
Sure.
a period of time. And he was always wanting this property to
Yes.
bless his heart. I remember so well.
Yeah.
And so I really had the privilege. I've served on the different committees. And then at one point, when I was younger, I taught a Sunday school class for high school people. So, you know, you married both my daughters, and we had great weddings here. And so it's been a great experience for me, and a great spiritual life and the people associated with it.
Well, I do want to say thank you. If nobody has ever said it to you directly, let me gather up all the gratitude and say thank you for everything that you have done for the church. And it's been a pleasure for those of us who have served here as ministers to have someone like you, quite honestly, to get counsel from and keep us out of trouble. And I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very good. Just out of curiosity. Back it up just a little bit here. Okay, go ahead.
Ready?
Yeah.
This interview has been conducted for the historical records of McFarland United Methodist Church, as well as the Voices of Oklahoma United Methodism project of the Oklahoma Conference Oral History Research Program, which is coordinated through the Commission on Archives and History with the support of the Oklahoma United Methodist Historical Society.